Hi, this is Dr. Stephanie Wautier, and I'm the host of Conversations with a Chiropractor. This is not a health how-to, but rather a conversation with some amazing people I've had the pleasure of being with on my journey of life. Think of it more like Tuesdays with Maury, a fireside chat, or chicken soup for the soul. Grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and enjoy this conversation with a chiropractor. Les, thank you for being on this podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
So you are a very decorated Army veteran, and you started as being enlisted as a private.
Yes.
Tell me how you went from being a private to a colonel.
I started the day after high school. I joined the Army.
Wow.
I went to Detroit to have them ship me to Fort Knox, Kentucky. I started out in basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, then went to South Carolina for advanced infantry training. And when I finished there, I got an assignment to Fort Lewis, Washington. And I was married. I came home and got married, and got married on Thanksgiving Day, 61 years ago, this Thanksgiving. And
to your high school sweetheart?
To my high school sweetheart. So the Army didn't recognize her as being responsible for her because I was a private, and you had to be a corporal over 4 years in the Army in order for them to pay for her or my son to move.
Really?
And so we had a child, so I had to pay to move her from Michigan out to Fort Lewis, Washington, and I got her out there, and we rented a little apartment off base because I was allowed housing on base as a private. And the first sergeant there was a tough old first sergeant, and he would say to the soldiers, he'd say, "Private Jones, I don't like you. You're in the jail tomorrow." And the next day in 1963, I don't know if Jones went to jail, but he disappeared from the company.
Wow.
And so
they had complete authority.
Yeah.
No checks and balances.
Well, not as much as they have today. And so making only $76 a month with a wife and a kid, I needed to earn some extra money. So I started washing and waxing house trailers that was by where we lived. And I also told the soldiers that I would pull KP or guard duty for them for $10 a night or a day.
Oh.
And so a lot of them paid me $10 to do KP. And so I went into mess hall the first time to do KP, and the first sergeant came in and got a bag of groceries and took them out and put them in his car. And I thought that was kind of strange.
Without paying for them.
Yeah. And as the first sergeant would tell different people that they were going to jail the next day and they disappeared, I thought maybe I needed some protection. So I got me a camera because I was in the mess hall like 3 or 4 days a week. And I got me a camera, and when the first sergeant backed his car up to the mess hall and opened the trunk, when he came out with 2 bags of groceries on the top of the steps, I was hidden behind a garbage container there, and I took a picture of him, and then as he bent over his car, I got a picture of him with part of his license plate. And I never told anybody I had these pictures.
Wow.
But I developed them, and I kept them in my fatigue jacket. And so we went to Alaska on an exercise, and everybody in the company lost a lot of weight. And so our track actually broke down, and we had 13 people in the track. We went over the Brooks Mountain Range, and we lost 10 rucksacks that were strapped to the outside as we went over them at night. And so we only had 3 sleeping bags, and when the track broke, we wound up spending 3 nights there trying to survive and notify other people we needed help. And of course, other people in the exercise thought we were just trying to trick them. Finally, on the 3rd day, a helicopter did land, and they gave us some sea rats, and so we survived it. When I got back to Fort Lewis, one day in May, the first sergeant called me in his office, and he said, "I don't like you, Thatcher, you're going to jail." I pulled the 2 photos that I'd been carrying around for 5 months or so. I threw them on his desk, and I said, I can't afford that. I got a wife and a kid. And he said, get out of my office, and I left. The next day, I had orders for Frankfurt, Germany.
Wow.
And normally, Fort Lewis was a 3-year assignment. But I knew with Vietnam going on, that probably wouldn't be the case, you know. And I went to Frankfurt, Germany.
So no questions asked. No one's asking why Thatcher is headed to Germany. No questions.
I called my wife and I said, how fast can you pack? And she said, I can pack in 3 hours. Why? And I said, well, we're going home. We're going to Battle Creek. I'm going to Germany. And so go ahead and pack. The train leaves in 5 hours, because I was paying her and my son's way on the train with mine going back to Battle Creek en route to Frankfurt, Germany. So when I got back to Battle Creek, I built picnic tables and sold them so I'd have enough money to fly her and my son to Germany when I got to Germany.
Wow.
And when I got to Germany, the guy said, anybody here can type? And I said, yeah, I can type 60 words a minute. And he said, well, we have a clerk typist school, and anybody that finishes first in clerk typist school gets to pick where they want to go. And I said, well, that will be me. I'll take the clerk typist school. So I went for 3 weeks to clerk typist school, and I graduated #1 in the class. And so I became got to pick where I wanted to go. And I said, I'll stay right here in Frankfurt. I'm bringing my family in. And so they signed me to the 45th Medical Battalion in Frankfurt, Germany. And when I got there, why, the E7 in charge said that he wanted me to be the courts and boards clerk. And so I was then in the process of helping officers kick people out of the United States Army for things that they'd done poorly.
Okay.
And so for 12 months I did that. And at the end of 12 months, I went to 10 different officers that I'd been working with. And I said, I'd like a letter of recommendation for Officer Candidate School. And they all signed one. So I went to Officer Candidate School in Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
Wow.
And so that was how I got started, from being a private in the infantry to then being a forward observer in the field artillery.
Wow.
And then I went to jump school, and from jump school went right to Vietnam. And when I got to Vietnam, why, I was a forward observer with an infantry company, 3rd of the 21st Infantry Company, Bravo Company, and we were in Tay Ninh. And Tay Ninh had a mountain on it. It was about 2,500 feet high, and it was the only high spot around. And on top of the mountain was a Green Beret element. And so I worked with the infantry, and I'd been in country since July and had not seen any action with the infantry. And now it was October, and the infantry said, the Green Berets need a forward observer, so we're sending you over to the Green Berets for a couple of weeks to go on operation with them. And I wound up in a 4-hour ambush where I lost both my recon sergeant and RTO, and fought my way out. That was my first ambush.
Wow.
And so when we got out of the ambush, then I went back to the infantry, and I fought my way out of 3 more ambushes with the infantry. So I had a total of 4 ambushes I fought my way out of. And I have a Bronze Star for Valor with 3 oak leaf clusters and a Purple Heart. And I'm in the Hall of Fame in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, as well as Fort Benning, Georgia, because I met a guy when I was in the Green Berets who was a private at the time, and he knew of my background, and he and I became very good friends, and I recommended him for OCS, and he went to OCS to Fort Benning, Georgia, and while he was down there, he saw the OCS down there, and I hadn't been in Fort Sill at the time, and in the Hall of Fame. And so he recommended that I be in the Infantry Hall of Fame, and so they agreed and put me in there, you know, because of course I fought with the infantry. For, you know, normally when you fight with the infantry, you get a combat infantryman's badge, but if you don't hold the MOS of 11B for infantrymen, then you can't get it. And so everybody that got it, I was there with them.
Wow.
But that's the way the system works. And
I mean, so not only are you climbing the ranks, you're highly decorated, you're obviously tenaciously, I mean, I mean, being in Vietnam, I can't even fathom what you saw, what you experienced. I mean, you say, I fought my way out of an ambush, but I mean, I can't even picture what that is like.
Well, to begin with, what you have to understand, if you're in an ambush, the only way to survive it is to assault it. You can't run from an ambush. You die. Okay. And it's very hard to charge an ambush when people are trying to kill you. Okay? It's very difficult, but that's the only way you can survive. And I went through 5 recon sergeants and 13 RTOs in 10 months over in Vietnam. And in one of my ambushes, one of my radio telephone operators decided he did not want to go forward anymore. Now, he's got the only radio that I'm trying to save the infantry with bringing in field artillery, and so I can't move forward without that radio. So in the middle of an ambush, I have to take the radio off him and put it on me, and the only way I can put it on me is to get up on my knees and get it on my back. And so I'm pretty upset with him, and I have a M16 that I'm carrying as well with 20-round magazine in it. And so after I take the radio off him and I start to get ready to get up on my back, I take my rifle with 20 rounds on full automatic and I stick it in his stomach and I start to put the radio on and I say, if I die, you're going with me. Fortunately, I didn't get hit.
You didn't.
And so I just sent him back to base camp after the ambush was over and got another one. But I was pretty upset with him, obviously, because he risked the whole infantry outfit by not letting me have the radio and by not staying with me with the radio, you know. And so I was a little upset with that. But unfortunately, during my 10 months there, I killed 1 American and wounded 10 with that field artillery. But every time they did an investigation, there was somebody else's problem. In other words, the infantry called in the wrong coordinates, gave the wrong coordinates of where they were actually located when they wanted it, and that sort of thing. The one guy I killed, I actually put in a body bag and had him carried out of the jungle, and it was in the middle of the night, and he was 500 yards from where he was supposed to be, and that was why he wound up getting killed. But it was unfortunate.
I'm sure no one can imagine that. I mean, I think about any elevated situation, the fight or flight response, your cortisol is pumping, it's dark, there's, you're getting misinformation. I mean, I don't think anybody who hasn't been in war can imagine to be in your shoes. No,
it's very difficult. And also, as a forward observer, you have to know where you're at every minute because you don't know when the ambush is going to hit. And so you have to make sure you know exactly where you're at on the map. And so if I was looking at a map or around a radio or anything, why, then they would know that I was some kind of a leader and they would try and kill you first. And so I'd have a map that was the size of my palm where we were going so that I could keep track of the coordinates so I could call in the fire mission. And I had a compass in the other hand, and I would just swing my hand and map, and that's how I knew where I was going in the jungle at all times. But I had to know exactly where we were at. And one time I had a new company commander. I went through 5 infantry company commanders in that 10 months. And this was a 5th Infantry Company commander. We were going along the border in Cambodia, and the new company commander said, Lieutenant, I want, he looked across a rice paddy and there was some enemy over there, and he said, I want 4 rounds of artillery over there on the ground right now. And I said, sir, we usually shoot a 200-meter white phosphorus height of burst above where the first round goes so that we make sure that we're not killing somebody by mistake. He said, no, I want all 4 of them on the ground. Do as I tell you, Lieutenant. And I said, yes, sir. And so I called in the fire mission. I said, please tell them to level the bubbles. We're on the gun target line. And they said, we're going to give them 2 at a time. We're going to shoot 2 and then the other 2. And so they gave me the command shot over, which meant they pulled the hammer on the artillery pieces and 2 rounds were coming. And then they said splash over, which meant it was 10 seconds from impact. And 1 round hit 30 yards behind me and 1 hit 30 yards in front of me. And it took out 4 infantrymen. It didn't kill them, it just wounded them. And I yelled, check fire, and there was a silence, and they came back and said, don't know how to tell you this, Tiwi, which was Vietnamese for lieutenant. Don't know how to tell you this, Tiwi, but there's 2 more rounds on the way. Well, by that time, I got all the rest of the infantrymen down because we weren't down before. And the next 2 rounds hit in the same place those 2 rounds hit, but they didn't hurt anybody. And so, when I left Vietnam, I went back to Fort Knox, Kentucky as a field artilleryman, yet in the reserves. I had a reserve commission.
Okay.
And which meant that probably when the war was over, they would be putting me out of the Army. And my boss said, I'm going to put you in for outstanding lieutenant at Fort Knox. And I said, really? I said, I'm a field artilleryman. This is an armor center. I said, that's not going to fly very well. And he said, I'm going to do it anyway. And so he put me in, and so I went to the board, and I won the first board. Wow. And the commanding general says, we're not having a field artilleryman represent the armor center in the Army Outstanding Lieutenant Board. So what we want to do, let's have another board. So they had a second board, and I won that one. And so the commanding general says, read my lips, do it again. So I had a third board, and I won that one. So when I won the third board, he called me in his office, and he said, Lieutenant Thatcher, he said, you're a reserve officer. He said, I'm willing to give you a regular Army commission in armor right now if you're willing to sign it. And I said, where's the paperwork?
Wow.
So I became an armor officer, never having served in a tank.
Wow.
And then from there, while I was still there, a lieutenant walked in my office and he said, hey, Captain, guess what? I was a captain at the time then. I got promoted. He said, guess what, Captain? I'm going to flight school. And I said, well, me confused with someone who cares. He said, well, the day I signed in, I doubled my pay. I said, sit down, let's talk. So he sat down, and sure enough, he went from $600 to $1,200 the day he signed into flight school.
Wow.
And so I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I put in for flight school thinking because I'm armor, I'm going to fly helicopters because the armored people did have helicopters. Okay. And instead they sent me to fixed wing school. And when they sent me to fixed wing school, they taught me, sent me up to the intelligence school, and I flew aircraft that had sticks through the wings. And so my second tour in Vietnam, I flew 1,000 hours locating the enemy, and the 4th Infantry Division was moving where I find the enemy. And they move people and go kill them. And so it was kind of a different experience, my second tour. And so for my second tour, they said that they wanted to make me a company commander. And I was armor at the time, but I was flying the planes, and so they made me a headquarters company commander of a radio research battalion, which is a military intelligence battalion. And so the company that I took over was in pretty bad shape, and they had a couple of colonels coming over called Hang and Hackenmack, Hackwood and McFadden. And they called them that because they always fired people all the time wherever they went. And so I'd just taken over the company, and I called the company together, and I said, in 10 days, Hanging Hackenmack is coming here, and you're going to be bad just like you are now, but you're not going to look bad. and so I had everybody clean the place up, and I had all my lieutenants and everybody working. I even worked, so we worked an extra 6 hours a day, officers included, to get the place ready. And when Hackenmack came out, they said, this is the best we've ever seen this. Is there anything we can do for you? And I said, I'm an armor officer. Why don't you make me military intelligence? And so they made me military intelligence, and that's how I served out the rest of my careers in military intelligence. But I want to be in military intelligence in the Green Berets as well. And I was a chief military intelligence officer in the Green Berets for 3 years. And during my first 3 days in the Green Berets, where I was the chief intelligence officer, my boss called me in the office, and he said, Lieutenant Colonel, at that time I was a Lieutenant Colonel, he said, Lieutenant Colonel Thatcher, he said, you're going to have to go to Morocco and save the King of Morocco with a team of Green Berets. And I said, I just got here. We don't even have stuff unpacked, my wife and kids. And he said, well, the Secretary of Defense says you're the only guy qualified. We need somebody that has 3 qualifications, military intelligence, parachutes, and Green Berets, and that's you. So he said, you got to go. And I said, okay, I'll go. So we go to Morocco, And we signed in a hotel in Morocco, and I go meet the king's security director, who is like a brigade commander in charge of security for the king. And nobody in America would have stuck up for the king because he had 400 concubines, and he'd go into villages and he would take 12-year-olds and add them to his concubines, you know. And so the first day there, the brigade commander for the king said, I got this Moroccan secret document that we're going to try and fix what's wrong here and make it better, and I'd like you to look at it. And I said, well, I'll have to take it back to my hotel room, and I'll give you my comments in the morning. And so he said, okay. So I went to the embassy in Rabat, and I said, make me a copy of this. And they said, we're not going to. And I said, where's your copy machine? So I went down the hall and made my own copy of this Moroccan secret document. And
like very classified information.
Yeah.
Like
and
unheard of that you even had it in your hands.
Yeah.
That they even let you take it overnight.
Yeah.
And here you're making a copy of it.
And so I got this copy hidden in my hotel room, and of course I make my comments on the copy that they originally gave me, and I give it to them, and so they make all the changes to make it happen. And about 6 or 7 weeks later, we're getting ready to leave, and that was in 1981. And 2001, 2 or 3, the king died, the King of Morocco, so I tell everybody it was a successful mission. But on the way out of the airport, I'm getting ready to leave the airport, and an announcement comes out over the airport that they're inspecting opening up every bag that's leaving and inspecting it. So I figure I'm going on the Midnight Express if they find me with this classified Moroccan secret document I'm trying to take home to give to the military intelligence community back home. And so the first bag I set up on the counters got 12 bottles of whiskey, because anytime I went out of country, I would restock my bar. I could buy a $100 bottle of whiskey at that time for about $20. Wow. And so I had a case that just carried 12 bottles of whiskey and didn't allow them to break, you know, you carry them on the airplane. And so...
Which I don't think you can do anymore.
No, probably not. Okay. But I set it up on the counter, and the Moroccan guy opens it up and he says, Mamma mia, que cosa, what is this? And I said, I brought 2 bottles just for you. And he said, 2 bottles for me? And he looked around and he said, which 2? And I said, you pick them. And he reaches in and takes out $100 bottles of scotch, and he hides it under the counter and puts a towel over it. And he says, he tags that bag, and he says, give me the rest of the bags. I said, no, tag them all. And he tagged them all, and I left. I didn't get on the Midnight Express.
Wow, Les. You know, I mean, I think that your like larger than life mentality and the fearlessness that you sort of exude, like you're like, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to show fear. I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to manipulate this situation. I mean, that's probably why in every step of your army circumstances, you just kept getting elevated and, you know, decorated. And I mean, I would say you're fearless.
Well, I tell people that when God put people here, sometimes he made mistakes, so he put people here like me to return them to our Father earlier than they intended. I've actually held people at gunpoint on 2 separate occasions and turned them into the sheriff. And I tell people if you're going to get involved in the community, get involved. And so I'm very much concerned that you need to help the community help itself sometimes. And
So you were in the military for how many years total?
30, just a little under 30 years, 30 years and 8 months, 9 months.
Okay.
And so when my last command was in Italy, and one of the guys that I had shot with field artillery in Vietnam was named Joe O'Brien. He's dead now. But Joe and I were good friends after the war. He was a sergeant at the time that I shot him, and I was a lieutenant. And so we stayed together. He got out of the Army, and wherever we'd go, he'd come and meet us, or if we'd go by his place, we'd meet him. And so when he found out I was going to Italy, he said, hey, Les, he said, if you're going to Italy, he said, you got to go take my Uncle Guido and his wife out to dinner in New Jersey. And I said, why do I have to do that? And he said, he's part of the Mafia, and he'll take care of you in Italy. And I said, really? So my wife and I went to New Jersey, and we took Uncle Guido and his wife out to dinner. And then when we went to Italy, I went to a NATO Defense College in Italy, and about 30 miles north of Rome, in a place called Olgiarta, where Elizabeth Taylor has a place. And there's like the place that I stayed in had 3 golf courses and 2 riding stables, and I only had to pay $600 a month because I was told by the Mafia to go there, you know.
Oh my gosh.
And so my wife and I and the kids stayed there for 6 months. Wow. And then when we left there, the Mafia there passed us off to the other Mafia in Naples, Italy, called the Camorra. And the Camorra was kind of an interesting group of people. But when they met me, they said, "We want to take you out to dinner, Colonel." And I said, okay. So I went out to dinner with them in Naples, and they got 3 armed guards from the Mafia with weapons displayed outside the restaurant that would take 175 people. It was 7 o'clock at night. There was no one in the restaurant but us 12, 12 guys. And we went in and we ate for 4 hours, and they wouldn't let anybody in until we left. And when we left, I said to them, the next time we go out, you're going to have to bring your wife, because I'm going to bring my wife, and she don't want to talk to you guys. And so that's how we went to dinner from then on, and their wives loved me for that.
I bet they did.
It was like their wives never got to go out, but I don't know.
And you know, it's so interesting, Les, because I guess maybe I'm like a cautious person. I would feel like fearful, but you just like jumped in and...
Well, for example, when the Mafia came to see me in my office, they had 3-piece Italian suits on, and they sat down, and that's when they invited me to dinner. And I said, well, you know, one thing I've got to do is I've got to come to your place. You've got to let me come to your place. And so about 15, 20 days later, they invited me to their place. Well, instead of me wearing my Army uniform with all my medals and stuff, I bought me a 3-piece Italian suit. And I go walking in with my sunglasses and a briefcase with, just like they walked into my office, you know? Yes. And then some things got a little complicated. And I had on my base a base exchange, a NATO base exchange, where the only people that were allowed to shop there was people who were part of the NATO military. And I go in there, and there's $400, $500 bottles of perfume. There's $3,000 televisions. And this is in 1989, 1990. And I'm saying, who can afford this kind of stuff, you know? Right. And I looked at all the stuff that was in there, and I said, hell, NATO military people can't afford this. Who the hell is doing it? Yeah. So I got my Italian carabinieri, lieutenant colonel, and I was a colonel at the time, and I said to him, I said, I want you to run a covert operation where you find out who's buying this stuff and you track it and find out where it's going. And he said, we can't do that in Italy. In Italy, when you find somebody buying something that you suspect is wrong, you have to arrest them immediately. That's the laws in Italy, okay? You can't follow them up, okay? So I said, well, never mind. And then I called in my own military police. And I had Air Force, Navy, and Army military police, 23 of them. And I said, we're running a covert operation. Nobody's going to know about this but us. And I said, I want to know where this stuff is going. Yeah. And so, and who's buying it and that kind of stuff. And how's it getting off base? And so the Americans were buying it. There was 101 Americans that were buying it, or not Americans, and that's not just Americans, but NATO were buying it, and they were giving it to the Italians, and the Italians had like a mule train of humans that were carrying it off the base, and it was carrying it to these other Italians in the Mafia. And so we had the base exchange closed for 3 days. And of course the base exchange was selling $33 million worth of stuff every year. And all of a sudden it went from 33 million to 15.5 million. And of course the profit from the exchange kept everything alive in park and recreation on the base. But it was the auto repair store, whether it was a gymnasium, whether it was the beach, whether it was the golf course, the swimming pools, the tennis courts. And so they said, well, we're going to have to reduce this. And I said, no, you're not. I had actually earned my master's degree in park and recreation management. Okay. And so I said, I will find out what's going on here in park and recreation management, and I will see what we need to do as far as a reduction of over 50% in our budget. And I found out that there was like 35 people that were working, that were coming in. They were Italians, but they weren't working. They weren't coming in and working at all. They were getting paid. Wow. And so we were able to cut the budget in half for the park and recreation department there and not close anything. And so, you know, it just...
Like you're cleaning it up, like investigating, like the details, the why. Now, was the Mafia... there was they weren't getting their stuff from the neighbors?
They never mentioned that to me.
Okay.
But we did arrest 2 Italians that were high up, that were working on the base. And when we arrested them, the charges got dropped, and we had to pay them like $100,000 for firing them and send them somewhere else.
Wow.
And the military people, of course, we processed out of the service. That was buying the stuff and selling it.
So even though you're friends with the Mafia, you're eating dinner with them, when you find out that it's them who is getting the products, did you have like an internal conflict?
No, I just had a list of people in my bottom drawer of my desk. I said to my wife, if I get killed, here's the people you need to go talk to figure out who did it.
Right. You're not going to speak of that at dinner.
No.
That you were the one behind the sting operation.
That's right. Yep.
Wow.
Yep. So, but we had a good time. We moved 33 times total. The 33rd time was when we got out of the military.
Okay.
Or I'm sorry, when we came from Fort Benning or Fort Bragg, North Carolina area, Fayetteville, North Carolina, up here. And we moved up here. I was actually got into real estate when I got out of the military down in North Carolina. And my boss said, if you really want to be a success in real estate, you have to get into property management. Sales go up and down, but rentals keep you afloat. Yeah. And so I thought, well, that'd be interesting. I don't know how I'm going to do that. And about that time, the phone rang, and an E6 from the base in Naples had gotten out of the military, and he called me and he said, hey, boss, they're having a property management school. The National Center for Housing Management is teaching it at Fort Belvoir, or near Fort Belvoir, Virginia. And so you should come. It's a 3-week class. And I thought, well, yeah, sure. And so it was for retired military people. And so I went to it. And when I got there, the boss said that just before it's over, people come in to hire people. And of course, a gal came in from Kalamazoo, and when I was selling real estate in North Carolina, just before I started the class, I said to my wife, what would you do if I died? And she said, I'd leave North Carolina and go to Michigan. And I thought, well, you don't need 2 crises at the same time, so maybe we ought to figure out how to get to Michigan, back to Michigan, where her and I came from. So we were trying to get back to Battle Creek, and one of the people that were coming in to make the interviews was from Kalamazoo. Medallion Management. And so I said, well, we'll go in and see them. So I wanted to see them, but she didn't want to see me because she was looking for E5s to go into the cities to manage properties for her in the cities, whether it was Detroit or where. They had like 150 sites that they managed in the state of Michigan. They were the 10th largest company in the state of Michigan.
Wow.
And so I said to the president of the National Center for Housing Management, I said, where is this gal staying, this president staying, and what is her flight schedule back to Kalamazoo? And if you can give me those 2 pieces of information, then I'll take it from there. And so he gave me that information, and so when she got and left her room and got on the elevator to go to catch her plane, I'm on the elevator with her, and I hand her my resume. And I said, I know you didn't want to see me, but I said, you ought to read this on the plane and see if we can't work together to help each other. And so I got a call after a couple of 3 days, got a call from her director of property or director of personnel, and he said, we're not going to pay your way to come from North Carolina to Michigan to interview, but if you want to come up here and interview, we'd be glad to interview you. And I said, well, I'm coming up there deer hunting, so I'll see you in a couple of months and we'll do the interview. So I did the interview and I thought everything went great. And I go back to North Carolina, and the National Center for Housing Management president called me and he said, you turned that job down in Kalamazoo? And I said, whoever told you that's a liar. Yeah. I was never offered the job. And he said, really? And I said, yeah. And so pretty quick I hang up and the phone rings about 2 hours later. And she said that she wanted to interview me, the president did, and she just fired her director of personnel for lying to her.
Wow. Oh, my
and
gosh.
So I went to Kalamazoo, and she had a job up here in the UP in Marquette. And so that's how we got up here. We took that job.
Wow.
So that's
So first working with this medallion management, and then you opened your own real estate business.
Before I finished working with medallion management, when I got up here, medallion management had provided a vehicle for people to go around in. And so the person that was filling my job before, he had claimed that was his vehicle. So he was now working for me. So I didn't see any sense of taking the vehicle away from him. So I said to the president, I'll buy my own truck as long as you don't complain about the mileage. And she says, I won't. I said, well, I won't cheat you on the mileage, but I just, I'm going to be taking care of 9 sites between here and Gaylord, Michigan. And so, I'm going to be traveling quite a bit. So I bought me a brand new truck. And so 3 years later, I got over 100,000 miles on it, and they called me to Kalamazoo, and I said, what's this about? And they said, well, we're having a meeting about people that use vehicles. And I said, well, that doesn't pertain to me because me and the president have this special deal.
Yeah.
And so I went to the meeting, sat through it, and when I got done, they said, by the way, she wants to talk to you. So I went in to see her, and she said, what do you think? I said, well, that didn't pertain to me because we have this deal. And she said, no, it does. She said, you're going to have to start using our vehicle now instead of your own. And they gave me a vehicle out of Kalamazoo that I drove back, left my truck there in Kalamazoo. And so I drove back, and when I got back up here, Judy says, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, we're going back to Kalamazoo. I'm going to give them my signature and get my truck back. And I said, I'm quitting them. And so I then joined the Sioux tribe of the Chippewa Indians, managing their properties.
Okay.
And they hired me because I was a realtor at the time, and they wanted me to sell them. And of course, we couldn't sell them and they didn't know that at the time, but I found out we couldn't sell them because they actually belonged to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And so when they no longer had a need for them, then they reverted back to Bureau of Indian Affairs. They couldn't sell them. And so I managed them for 5 years. And then when I got done managing them, I started my own company. And so...
it's so interesting. I think with all of the autonomy that you had and all of the risks that you took, it probably felt a little suffocating for you to have these people, I don't want to say suppressing you, but when you basically risked your life and done X, Y, Z, and then you have somebody who's sort of splitting hairs about mileage and trucks. And that's very different.
Yeah, it is. It certainly is.
So you've obviously been your own boss now for all these years. You still own Northern Eagle Realty.
Yep.
And
Northern Eagle Realtors, LLC. And, we manage properties. We've managed probably over 1,000 on the base. We currently manage around 100 on the base. And we've managed some of them in Ishpeming and some in Marquette. And so, and we also sell properties. And
now, Les, do you mind me asking how old you are?
I'll be 80 on the first day of deer season this year.
November 15th.
Yep.
And you have no plans to retire?
No, I don't go to work. I go to play. We have a sign on our desk that says we change the lives of people God puts in our path. We get to help people all the time. But some people me and God cannot help.
Right. There's always those few.
But for the most part, I get to self-actualize. When I had a veteran that was unemployed, homeless, and I brought him on board and we got him a job. And he lived with us for a year. And at the end of the year, he was a success and he moved on. And I don't care if it's a veteran or who it is. I work with the homeless people here in town all the time. So, we get to help a lot of people that need help. And I'd say the last 4 people that I moved into units were from the homeless shelter.
Wow.
So we try to do the best we can.
That's amazing and that's wonderful. So, so powerful. All the things that you keep doing for this community.
Well, people said to me, they said, the Library of Congress me down in Florida, when they were switching from interviewing Korean War veterans to Vietnam veterans, I was one of the first that they interviewed. They spent 5 hours taping my conversation. At the end of 5 hours, they said, "We only have one question left for you, Les." I said, "What's that?" They said, "Why do you think you're still alive?" And I said, "God's got a purpose." So, you never know.
That is that sort of brings everything almost to like this perfect moment of ending our conversation. You have a purpose that in every single day you keep living out that purpose.
Yeah.
That's amazing and beautiful.
My wife and I both believe it, so.
I'm so grateful that you came on my little old Conversations with a Chiropractor podcast after being interviewed at the Library of Congress. This is a little janky here in our little...
Well, I'm honored that you wanted to talk to me.
Well, thank you for all you've done for our country in those 30 years of service and all that you keep doing for our community, Les.
Well, thank you for fixing my back all the time. She's the greatest chiropractor I've ever met. So.
Well, thank you so much, Les. Thank you for letting me interview you today.
You betcha. Have a good day.
Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, would you please rate it, review it, like, or subscribe? You can find me on social media at wautierwellness.com, Dr. Stephanie Wautier on Instagram, or Wautier Wellness Chiropractic and Massage on Facebook. And I'm so curious where your next conversation will take you.